Our reporter Mbalisi Banyoni, who has been at the St. George's Hotel in Irene for that ANC NEC meeting. Now, as she said, there's been little to no communication, but we do know that that meeting will be going on until later on. The spokesperson came out earlier on saying that as and when the meeting ends, that is when we will know exactly what is happening in that interview. Now, for more on this matter, we are now joined live in the studio by political analyst Tshepo Kgadima. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, good evening.
Now, it's been a really big day. We saw a reporter now giving us an update. The media is camped outside. But let's look at the crux of the matter. Before we get on to the merits of the NEC meeting and whether to remove President Jacob Zuma or not, because that's what the meeting's about essentially, does the NEC have the power to remove a sitting president?
The simplest answer to that is no. There is no empowering provision in terms of the ANC constitution, even for the discussion, let alone a motion that we are made to believe was tabled by Minister Derek Hanekom, which we are made to understand was since seconded. So on the procedural grounds and on the basis that there is no empowering provision in terms of the ANC constitution to even discuss or vote on such a motion, clearly then the meeting is in an untenable position. If there is an adverse finding or outcome from this meeting in terms of a resolution, should they carry the day in terms of voting that indeed the president is supposed to step down from either in his capacity as the president of the African National Congress or in his capacity as the president of the Republic, in both instances they would have acted ultra vires. And most probably, my analysis is that one of the structures within the ANC will most probably take the NEC to court. And it is my analysis that they will hold course on and succeed in challenging such an outcome. So, but what does this tell us? It tells us that the ANC is in a very difficult position. And the simplest way to describe what is happening, clearly this is mutiny. So the question then that needs to be asked is, well, what do you then do with the mutineers? There are one or two things that can happen. The mutineers can hold day and achieve what is effectively a bloodless coup. And in the event that they fail, one will stand to see what happens in the next day or two. Will the mutineers, by their own volition, relinquish the positions that they currently hold? Because we are talking about cabinet ministers, we are talking about chairs of portfolio committees in parliament and chief whips. That's what we are made to believe. Or in the event that they do not do that, the question that needs to be, well, we wait to see, will the president then do the presidential act in terms of then court-martialing the mutineers, so to speak, and ensuring that they are punished for the mutiny. But clearly it doesn't matter which way we look at it, it is mutiny and is an attempted bloodless coup, but has got very damning ramifications for the standing of this republic internationally. Now,
speaking of ramifications, this move by Tourism Minister Derek Hanekom to table this motion of no confidence against President Jacob Zuma, why now?
Why not? Well, that's the, we will hope to find out when the ANC does finally come out and explain to the nation what really happened. But one needs to bear in mind this. Minister Derek Hanekom is also a member of the National Working Committee of the African National Congress. And the National Working Committee of the ANC is the one that is responsible for drafting of the agenda for the National Executive Committee. And this so-called motion that is being discussed, that has brought South Africa to a standstill almost, was not on the agenda of the African National Congress or of this NEC. And we made to understand, reliably so, that it was only tabled on an ad hoc basis. So the issue then becomes, somebody in his position, being on the National Working Committee, how did it get to a point whereby he caught everybody by surprise? If he didn't catch them by surprise, and if he was so confident that indeed there was merit and there was support for such a motion, why did he not see it fit to have tabled to the National Working Committee so that it could have been duly considered? But I think that it is not an innocent thing. It was an opportunistic move, gamble. Will it be able to pay the dividends that he has hoped? I doubt that it would. As I say, on the basis of legality, It is clearly unlawful in terms of the ANC constitution, and to date there hasn't been anyone who has come out and say this is the empowering provision in terms of the ANC constitution, hence the motion that, or the so-called motion that is currently being discussed. But I think for South Africans, what we need to maybe be concerned about is that the effect of this stunt, if I can put it that way, has got the effect of demeaning and undermining the office of the president, leave alone who the individual is that is in that office, but it's got that effect of undermining. So today we are made to understand that President Yoveri Museveni of Uganda is on a state visit, we would think, to South Africa. He met with the president very briefly. You can't help but wonder what was going on in the mind of President Museveni. When you've got mutiny, clearly ministers in your cabinet that publicly undermine you, when you meet with another head of state, that head of state cannot take you serious, and therefore that begs the question that if the president does not do what he's supposed to do as the executive president, as empowered by the constitution of the republic, most certainly I think we as a country and that office of president would have been undermined and would have been brought into disrepute. And it's something that only the president can be able to remedy. Right now, unfortunately, one has to say, well, unless he takes decisive action, he would have been not only the architect, but he will also be the builder of the morass that we are currently seeing, which has got the unfortunate effect of undermining our standing as a country globally.
Now, you've just said that the ministers going against the president or, bringing about this motion of no confidence is a form of undermining him. We've got 3 ministers who are for it, as well as 34 NEC members. Let's look at that right now, because this is not the first time that, not specifically the ANC, but, you had some veterans, for example, ANC veterans, you had the opposition political parties, them saying that the president should step down. Why is it different this time around? Were those people not undermining him, or is it different because it's the people that he works with? But isn't it easier for somebody to judge you if they are within your space?
Well, first, maybe let's put it this way. It is interesting that the African National Congress and the highest decision-making structure within the ANC, being the National Executive Committee, has somewhat been tolerant of acts of ill discipline and misconduct by their members, where they have taken no action whatsoever. So if anything, though those people might have been in the minority at the beginning, they have been emboldened by that lack of decisive disciplinary measures being brought on those that expressed clearly ill discipline and misconduct. So what we are seeing now is just a culmination that is as a direct result of the ANC failing to have taken decisive action at the time. Well, as for outsiders or alliance partners, that is not as serious as having somebody who serves in cabinet. The correct thing to do, if indeed those that are saying, President, you must go, that are serving in his cabinet, the first thing that they should have done themselves, they should have resigned and say, we no longer desire to serve under your leadership because we do not believe in the quality of your leadership. We do not believe that you are a leader worthy of being followed, because the Constitution of the Republic, once you are voted into being President of the Republic, certainly everybody who serves in your cabinet, they cannot afford to act in this manner because it undermines the very essence, the very standing of that sacred office of state president.
Let's backtrack a little bit and look at the times in the National Assembly where there have been motions of no confidence against the president. The ANC has the majority there, and every time it's happened, it obviously,
yes,
nothing happens. They basically win. And we had this just last week or 2 weeks ago. Where were these ministers that are now putting forward a motion of no confidence? They were there in the National Assembly. Why do you think they chose not to act then and waited now?
Well,
what is it that happened in this past week, maybe, or the past, or has it been a build-up of frustration or a build-up of no confidence?
Yeah. Look, there's only 1 or 2 things that can happen. That for me is that later on, we will get to know the details, because I think at some point in time they will go publicly to explain what effectively necessitated them taking this very unusual and unconstitutional but very weird step of raising such a motion that ordinarily they should have known. Being leaders of the ANC, they should have known that in terms of the ANC constitution, there's not even any provision they could rely on to take this action. But we should not be surprised at what happened in Parliament, because all the members of Parliament are not there on their own steam. They are there on the party ticket. And if the party has resolved that this is the manner in which they will vote on any particular matter, certainly you cannot expect to have any dissenters in that regard, and that should not have surprised us. However, what is now being done, it appears that it was opportunistic, but only one or two things can happen. Is either they can hold course, succeed in their coup d'etat. In the event that they fail in their coup d'etat, they can't help but have to fall on their sword, because the situation now is so untenable that it is impossible for them to continue in their positions in cabinet and otherwise under the very president that they have publicly now expressed that they have got absolutely no confidence in him.
Now, speaking of that, you've just mentioned now that if it happens that this motion of no confidence goes nowhere, like you foresee, for example, that these ministers should resign because they can't work under a president they have no confidence in. But is that fair also? Because isn't this a way to say this is what we've observed? Isn't that the purpose of being part of a democracy, saying that we have observed these are our issues, and maybe we couldn't communicate it or articulate it in Parliament because of party politics, like you mentioned earlier on, but we are here now together and this is how we feel. How do we deal with it? Because you've only got 34 members anyway, right? And only 3 ministers that are going for this no confidence. So ultimately it might not even go anywhere, but isn't it a time of introspection, like the ANC keeps speaking of, saying that it's time we introspect, it's time we look within ourselves and look at what our problems are? So why should they resign for observing?
The requirement for and the test for leadership is that when a person is in leadership position, they should be able to discern and they should be able to foresee the outcome of any move, any action, and the decision that they make. And these ministers, and in this case, as I would say, refer to them as effectively the mutineers, they should have foreseen that the action and the motion that they are about to table, what is the ultimate end? And the ultimate result of it is certainly that is either you achieve your coup d'etat, and one wonders on what basis, because it is unlawful in the first instance. So how was it possible that they did not know ordinarily that there is no empowering provision in terms of the ANC constitution? So that, if anything, is aggravating on their already untenable position that they have not foreseen or could not discern about the impact and the aftermath of their conduct and their action. And certainly it speaks to one thing, that is what? It is ill discipline and it is misconduct. However, we as a country, forget the African National Congress as a party, we as a country, we now find ourselves in an invidious position whereby now the world is wondering. We talk about investors, we talk about the policymakers who can make decisions on where this country goes, the business community. We talk about many other people who are now wondering who actually is in charge. And unless somebody who has got the position starts to act in the manner required of that position, and that person being the president, unfortunately it will only exacerbate an already confusing but sad situation. So in this case, I've had some other people say, well, President Zuma is forgiving and is encouraging unity. But when you have this situation, that cannot hold. But also this, in my opinion, it is a golden opportunity, taking into account where we are in terms of our economy, to effectively rationalize what many agree that is an oversized cabinet. This is a golden opportunity that, as you cull the mutineers, if I can put it that way. That then
That's
you
very
rationalize
subjective.
the cabinet, you reduce the size of the cabinet in order for it to be effective. There are many serious issues that this government has to be focusing on and tackling to ensure that we can have a stable country with an economy that is growing. So this side shows it unfortunately diverts attention from the key issues, be it on land, be it on education, be it on ensuring that the country can re-industrialize so that we can achieve growth. Because we must not forget that the economy that is growing or projected to grow at 0.5%, and 0.5% when it's actually shedding jobs, that is a situation, that is a cocktail of disasters that we can least afford as a country. And something radical has to be done, and it has to start with right now using perhaps this crisis as a golden opportunity to do those things that can put us on a stable growth path, that we can now to start to see that decisions are made. Because the effect of ministers who publicly defy the president, the question that has to be asked is that, well, what instruction is he actually able to give in his capacity towards his ministers if they can publicly defy him in this manner? So it should not surprise us, therefore, that in many instances, many aspects of government, there are complaints of lack of action, lack of progress on some of the programs that the government has put forward. Now, today, if anything, I think this has really effectively been the testimony of the root causes of this. But I think for the mutineers, if I can put them that way, you know, these are tempestuous political seas, and they are going to sink their course.
I want us to move on, but before that, I'm actually glad you mentioned the economy and that South Africa's, our economy is only growing at about 0.5%, which is hardly anything to rave about. But you've got business leaders, and you mentioned investors and business leaders, like the Save South Africa organization, comprised of business leaders in South Africa, who have been calling for the president to resign, right? So that is top business people saying that the president should resign. Are they mutineers as well? Because you've been saying that the ministers are mutineers, right? And they are defying the president, etc., because they are saying that he should resign. Who are the business leaders in this context when they say the president should resign, and why are they saying it?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's very interesting, but I haven't seen anything substantive from the business leaders. First, we have to bear in mind that this country right now, we are confused in terms of what actually our macroeconomic policy should be, and taking into account that the governing party is a broad church, as some people normally refer to it as. So you've got Labour, you've got Communist Party, you've got different ideologies, but we have not yet as a country decided that, are we neoliberal in our economic approach, or are we having a mixed economy with state interventionism? And unfortunately, when you look at the business leaders who we are made to understand that they are currently, the big businesses in this country are sitting on an 800 billion rand cash pile, which they are not investing in this economy. And on the other hand, you've got a government that is literally hoping and praying that the business leaders will invest in the economy, and they are not. Let's look at the National Development Plan, for example. The price tag on the National Development Plan is 4 trillion rand between the time that it was passed until 2030. 1 trillion rand of that was to have been as infrastructure spending and economic infrastructure spending that would have been driven by the state-owned companies. Now, when we sit here today, National Treasury does not have the capacity to raise further debt on the capital markets of even 100 billion rand. So where does that put us? If they were to be succeeding in raising 100 billion rand, with the rating agencies having made the pronouncement that they made, you still have a 900 billion rand shortfall. And there's no capacity, and there isn't answers, the hard answers that are required to this difficult question of how do you then ensure that you can make that giant leap to grow the economy to the 4 to 6% quartile. On the other hand, we are hoping in terms of the National Development Plan that 3 trillion rand will be an investment coming out of private sector. Now, they're sitting with 800 billion rand. There isn't any solid plans that business leaders have shared with government, and by extension share with the public, that the 3 trillion rand as contained, enumerated in the National Development Plan. This is how we are going to be raising that capital, and this is the industries we are going to be investing in to ensure that we can answer the question of stable economic growth, we can answer the question of sustainable job creation, and ensuring that at the end of the day, this country can start to yield benefits that live for many more people, and also reduce the tax burden on the ordinary citizens. We must bear in mind that more than 2/3 of our tax revenue comes from ordinary people, from citizens. In fact, business pays no more than 18% of our total 1 trillion rand plus of tax revenue that we collect. So business cannot say that, in fact, that they are paying their fair share of taxes. If anything, they've never had it so good in terms of a tax regime in this country. And these are serious problems. Can you continue to tax the consumer as we currently sitting, where the consumer, the ordinary public, is contributing over 2/3 of the tax revenue base? Those are unsustainable, and those are the things that I hope that a gathering such as the one we're having in Irene now of the African National Congress Executive Committee should have been addressing those issues. Also transformation. Transformation is something that has just been lip service. 2013, I think the ANC spoke about radical economic transformation. The only thing radical about it was the statement and no action.
I want to come in there because I feel like now we're digressing. Yes. I want to go back to this motion of no confidence because that's the focus right now. Let's look at some of the things that they've mentioned. There's the state capture report, which is more recent. There's, of course, the issues with Uganda. These are some of the things that they have used against the president, for lack of a better word, right? And you have said that the ANC NEC has somewhat failed to deal with ill discipline before amongst its members in general. Maybe you can include the president there. What do you think should have been done in terms of handling the Uganda situation specifically, as well as the recent state capture report, to have made it in such a way that the members would have felt like this has been dealt with and we can move on? And we have never gotten to a point like this now.
Well, by their own account, the African National Congress had a consultative process with the branches, with the structures. That was after the Uganda Constitutional Court judgment. And out of that process, we are meant to believe, by their own account, that there was no call for any one leader, including the president, to step down. So as far as that matter is concerned, the courts pronounced on it, and it is a matter that has since been closed. What more effect? Can it diminish the political currency of the African National Congress going forward? The answer is probably very little. And we saw that in the local government elections, that there was more apathy, more than what they had normally been accustomed to, more than actually them seriously losing the electorate.
Well, they did feel it.
Yes, they did feel it. And we know that the results of that. But I'm saying that matter has since been closed. When you look at the state of capture report, I'm one of the analysts that continue to hold course that it cannot be regarded to be a report because it does not meet the objective test of legality in terms of what is required to come out of that office to deem it to be a report. And also, it has to be borne in mind that there is still time where others who are implicated in terms of that document or that report can bring about review proceedings. So therefore, you cannot go and take it that it is conclusive, because let's go back 2008, for example, when former President Thabo Mbeki was asked to step down on the basis of a judgment, a High Court judgment by Judge Nicholson. We know that that judgment was appealed and set aside by the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein. So you cannot go and base it, well, we have a report here which is reviewable, and in review, some of the contents of that report can be set aside. Therefore, it would be premature for anyone even to attempt to hold cause in accusing the president in any shape or form, because that process has not been brought to its logical conclusion of ensuring that there can be no comebacks. What the ANC is seemingly battling with, and the National Executive Committee seemingly battling with, is how to ensure that they can communicate succinctly and carry all of their members, all of their structures along. Because when you listen to them speak, their structures, their alliance partners, they're speaking in a multiplicity of diverse voices. And that is not good for the ANC, because if anything, it creates confusion, and hence it is going to cost them come even campaigning for the National Congress, that the elective conference, as to who would actually be suitable. They are not asking the hard questions. For example, when you've elected or nominated and elected a president, well, who else is there? 85 other people. What criteria, what profile should such a person be to serve on the National Executive Committee? They are not asking those relevant questions to be able to save the party going forward. And that is going to cost them, because we must bear in mind this, that when one is a member of the National Executive Committee, effectively that person is eligible to be a cabinet minister or to be a chair of a portfolio committee in Parliament. And when you don't ask the difficult questions of, say, who should have the honor of being a member of the National Executive Committee, taking into account the duties and the functions required of National Executive Committee members, unfortunately, that is a self-inflicted harm that the parties bring upon itself. And this leadership, taking into account this weekend, accepting a unlawfully tabled motion, I think if I was an ANC member, I would be deeply worried by the conduct of those NEC members.
It's actually interesting that you say if you were an ANC member, you'd be concerned. I'm looking now on social media, people reacting to this discussion that you and I are having. And, you know, it's very diverse. You'll have people who generally agree with what is happening, and then there are people who disagree, maybe with even this conversation that we're having now. What do you say to South Africans who are saying, actually, this conversation needs to happen? We've been calling for it from different spheres. We've been hearing about it from different spheres, be it business, be it opposition parties, be it in parliament, etc. It's time it happened. What do you say to an ordinary South African who says, actually, you're not speaking for me, this is how I feel about it?
Oh, yeah. Look, granted. But I think we're seeing the failure of communication by the ANC. One has to bear in mind is that the Constitution of the ANC does not specify the duties and functions, power and authority of a president. So effectively, you have the Constitution of the Republic that vests a lot of executive power and authority in the president, whereas the Constitution of the ANC, based on the resolution that they took in Polokwane in 2007, where they said the party is the center of power, whoever is the president of the ANC must therefore be the president of the Republic, they by their own account did not proceed to take that discussion further of what it actually means that you are the center of power, and what is expected of the person who is president of the ANC, and what is expected of all the other 85 people, from deputy president, secretary general, and all of that. And hence, there is this confusion. So, yes, the discussion, the discourse is encouraged, but is now called upon the ANC to be the one that should take the lead by explaining itself, by explaining its processes, and also highlighting these impediments that are there, that you might be president of the ANC, but within the ANC, because of democratic centralism principle that most of them so much speak about, you effectively have to look at the collective and not any one individual. President Zuma, let's say he goes tomorrow, and he's going soon, by the way, let's not forget that. Come 2017, the elective conference, there will be no Zuma in the position of president of the ANC. Come 2019, he won't be there. So one has to wonder, to say, they are spending so much time discussing a whole host of issues that only have an effect of not only deflecting, but reducing their effectiveness as a political party to be able to sell their message to the electorate. But they are discussing issues that there will be a non-factor come the next general election. And it's very interesting. We live in interesting times, but in terms of the Chinese expression, which means that these are times of war.
They are indeed. Now, we're running out of time, but just finally, we're waiting for an update, obviously, from that NEC meeting, which will come as and when they finish. But let's look at the ANC after this NEC meeting. How divided will it be? Just briefly.
Look, they are divided. So it doesn't need to be denied by anybody. The ANC is divided, and at least in terms of the National Executive Committee. But somebody has to now take charge. Who will that person be? It might be those if they carry the day, those that they say the president must go, and if he does go. But somebody has to take charge. Will that person be the deputy president? I've been sort of curious to observe that the name of the Deputy President, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been thrown in to say, well, it would appear that there's a suggestion to say President Zuma must step down as the President of the Republic and let Deputy President Ramaphosa step into that position. He's been given a poison chalice, in my opinion. And his silence, by the way, and it's a tacit acceptance of that. And he has unfortunately been given a poison chalice. In what way? When you are voted in at National Conference of the ANC, you cannot get 100% unless you are the only candidate. So if there are more than one candidate, you do not get 100%. Therefore, it says that there will be people who would not have voted for you, but post the election, everybody else is expected to rally behind you. But if you allow a situation where now some people say, well, maybe we're not supportive of this president when he was voted in, the next one that comes after this one will unfortunately not be sitting with a chalice, but they'll be sitting with a poison drum.
Thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. That was political analyst Tshepo Kgadima speaking to us on the ANC NEC meeting, which is currently underway. Now, in breaking news, the ANC is inviting members of the media to a briefing on the outcome of that meeting that we've just spoken about. That's the NEC committee meeting, which is being held in Irene, south of Pretoria.